Hey there, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. Despite all of the challenges, Ukrainian warriors continue defending their country very bravely, and today we're going to be covering the situation on the front line. It's going to be just a map update, so if you're here for some kind of commentary, let's see each other in the next video. Let's dive into details on what's happening on the battlefield. And to do that, I would prefer to use another map. This map. This is a map from the Blackbird Analyst Group. And this map I like because it's a lot more detailed. It also shows fortifications. So let's start with the Kursk area. What's the general situation in the last month or so? Russia has concentrated in this area significant forces. We're talking something like 3-1 Russians to Ukrainians, maybe 4-1. It's also including the North Korean troops. We last discussed the Kursk situation when we were talking about Ukrainian potential small offensive that they did towards the direction of Berdyn, which is located right over here. Since then, officially Ukrainian controlled territory did not expand, but the gray zone around this area has been technically expanded, so Ukrainians are more active in this area, and that was the only outcome of that offensive. But beyond that, we also hear recently that Ukrainians have made additional raids towards the more southern direction compared to what they did before, and again they also are expanding so-called gray area, so they're just being a little bit more active in this area. Then Russians have been trying to push Ukrainians from the western flank a lot. They were trying to put pressure on Ukrainians first around the area of Maloloknya, which went absolutely disastrous for Russians. It was a big massacre of their forces, and there has been countless videos of Russian and North Korean columns being destroyed in the area. Since then, Russians have put a lot more pressure towards the southern side of the area around Sverdlikova. They have been pushing here quite extensively, and just recently they have been trying to push again with some minor advances towards the Ukrainian positions. All in all, the Kursk offensive for Ukrainians have been a major great success. Right now, Ukrainians are just reaping the benefits, while I know for people on the ground that doesn't seem so, because war for them is absolute nightmare. It's manslaughter, it's just meat grinder. But from the top level, this is excellent because Russia is fighting on the Russian territory. They're dedicating a lot of forces to do so, and they're not really having a great success. The advances that Russia is having here compared to the losses that they're having is minuscule, probably the worst on the front line as it is right now. Around the northern Kharkiv area, the only thing that we're hearing from this side is that there are some probing attacks, small groups trying to infiltrate one side or the other. Nothing too serious to report, so for now I would consider this to be stagnant. Then around the area of Dvorichna. Now, if you remember, Russia took a little bit of a bridgehead where they crossed the Oskil River and created a bridgehead around the area of Masutivka. And it was contained for a while, but since then Russians have put in a lot of effort, and they've also attacked towards Dvorichna and effectively took control of the biggest part of the settlement. So they're now in control of Dvorichna, and they have been trying to advance also towards the west and towards the south. Right, if beforehand we could call this bridgehead as worrying and should be considered for potential developments, now it is slowly becoming threatening. It is very clear that Ukrainians in this area don't have the most experienced forces, and they don't have the forces with the biggest combat capabilities. The only kind of a good news, so to say, to this is that Russians seemingly in this area also do not have a lot of forces. They are using the same crawling tactic because they don't have an overwhelming advantage in manpower and technology in this area, but they are slowly trying to crawl over to the Ukrainian side. The danger is that if Russians would have forces that they could dedicate to this area, then Ukrainians might not have enough capabilities in this region to defend against that. And it could lead to a fast collapse of the Ukrainian front line, and Russia could take over significant parts of Ukraine very, very rapidly. If we're talking about what Russia can achieve with this bridgehead, then there are two vectors of attack for Russia. One is the northern and one is the southern one. If we're talking about the northern one, then their goal might be recapturing all the territory that they lost during the Kharkiv counteroffensive executed by the Ukrainians. It's a big territory, but there is no points of interest, so to say, for Russia. There's no big cities. It's just Ukrainian territory that Russia could capture to secure some kind of bridgehead and force Ukrainians to fight on their own territory once again, in this case, in Kharkiv region. However, getting through towards that territory with the current tempo of advances would be really problematic for Russia. Northern Ukraine is a lot more densely packed with forests. There's a lot more rivers. It's a very difficult terrain to advance through very fast unless the army that you're fighting with is running away and basically throwing their weapons down, which Russians did when Ukrainians counterattacked. So if Ukrainians would not, and I'm not expecting they to do so, to surrender this territory, it would be a very big challenge for Russians to try to get through this area in any amount of reasonable time. So while there is no big cities, no urban fighting, it is still a very difficult area for Russia to navigate. A much more likely offensive for Russia is to move southward. And if we're talking about southward, then obvious point of interest for Russia is Kupiansk, and more specifically Kupiansk-Wislowy. Now, Kupiansk is a big hub. You can easily tell that by just looking at the types of roads that are coming here. You can see there's a big road that goes here. There's a big road that goes over here. It's literally a crossroad. It's a big logistics point for Russia, so they would be able to establish this as their point of control within the northern Kharkiv region. And the same goes for Kupiansk-Wislowy, except it's for the trains. This effectively means that if Russia is able to take the Kupiansk and Kupiansk-Wislowy by attacking from the north, from the side of crossing the river, and maybe pushing also from this side, creating a very dangerous situation for Ukrainians, this would effectively force Ukrainians to withdraw from the eastern side of the Oskil River towards the Ukrainian positions in the west. But this is Russian wet dream scenario. They're not even close. Taking Kupiansk is not going to be easy. It's still relatively well fortified and important settlement for Ukrainians. There is a lot of things to be expecting to resist Russians there. Beyond that, around the area of Kupiansk, there are always reports of Russians trying to attack around the area of Kolesnikivka. And here is where we got reports of Ukrainians actually counterattacking and pushing Russians back from time to time. So Russians, despite the fact that they're trying to move from south to north towards the Kupiansk-Wislowy, they are not really having a great success, and it feels that Ukrainians have found another defensive position in this region where they're able to protect the key points from the Russian advances. Moving southward, we're talking about the situation around the Lyman axis. Here, the biggest story that we talked about was what's happening with Terney. Terney, I explained that it's a gateway to a gateway of Lyman. Lyman being the key point of interest for Russia that they would like to capture. It's a great hub for any kind of Russian offenses in the area. They can really use it as a jump-off point, and it would strengthen their positions in the regions significantly. However, to get to that point, they need to get past Zarychne, and Zarychne has been bone in the Russian throat for a while now. The problem is you cannot really get through Zarychne if you're just attacking straight forward. It's a very nasty position to be in because Ukrainians are controlling both the northern flank, so they can attack you from the north, and they're controlling from the south, the forests, so they can assault you from the south. And there's been a lot of open terrain in this area, so Russians just get under crossfire, and there have been countless assault waves of Russians that have been destroyed trying to attack Zarychne directly. So Russian wet dream was always to try to collapse their positions, Ukrainian defense positions from the north. They were attacking towards Terney from the northern side for a very, very long time, and they were not successful. Finally, they were able to execute an operation where they crossed this body of water, and they were able to capture Ivanivka, and they were able to capture hills around Ivanivka, and this effectively gave enough pressure for Russians to finally get through Terney. Now they have pretty much exactly the same situation with Yampolivka. And Yampolivka will become additional problem for Russians. So while they did take Terney, it doesn't mean that they very quickly can get to Zarichne. They're still pretty far away. Yampolivka will still be a challenge for Russia. So overall, the situation in Terney, it's problematic. It's not good that Russians are able to advance at all. But if we're giving like how far are we from situation becoming threatening or critical, well, threatening you could say it is already. But is it becoming worrisome? Is it becoming really bad? I would not say so. So while it is unfortunate that Terney has fallen, it is not the end of the world for now. Chasiv Yar, an absolute stronghold of Ukrainians. Russians by this point control about 50% of the Chasiv Yar proper. However, if you look at the map, and I like this map just because how detailed it shows the difficulties of Chasiv Yar. There's different terrains, there's body of waters in that city, plus the whole city is like located on these hills that go up and down, up and down, up and down. And Chasiv Yar is a big issue for Russians. They obviously want to capture Chasiv Yar because it gives access for Russians to certain heights in this region that would allow potentially to develop certain offensive operations towards the biggest goal of the regions for Russia around Kramatorsk and Sloviansk, which are these two massive urban settlements in this area, which Russia is not even close to. However, while it looks that Russia controls about 50% of Chasiv Yar and they controlling the urban part of the settlement, the big parts with the hills and a lot of the lakes and forested areas are still not being taken, and they are far away of being taken. So there is plenty of fight for Russia still to have in Chasiv Yar. Situation is threatening, but not catastrophic yet, to put it lightly. The situation around Toretsk, Russia has been pushing slowly around Toretsk. They have been capturing the rest of the city. Ukrainians have recently been being pushed out of the pocket around this Nilipovka. So Ukrainians were trying to withdraw as slow as they can. But we can kind of see already that the siege of Toretsk is coming to an end. And this is unfortunate, but there is still some fight left on the outskirts of the city. But we should expect that the fall of Toretsk will be happening maybe within a month or so. But I've been wrong before, and Ukrainians have proven me wrong plenty of times by holding the positions that I thought would be collapsing months before they actually do. So that's why I'm not disregarding this area of defense so far. The fall of Toretsk would effectively collapse the Ukrainian defenses around the south of Bakhmut. So Kurdyumivka, this would be probably very fast. We would see this whole area being contested by Russians, and we would transition towards the siege of Konstantinivka. Then moving to Pokrovsk area, where Russia is having quote-unquote best success. Here is Russia is concentrating their main effort. From the Pokrovsk axis and Kurakhove axis, what we must say that the biggest developments so far have been that Russians are not having as much success as they were having before. Their tempo of advancements are still low, but it's continuing on, so it's not dropping further, so they're still having some reserves. What is dropping a little bit is their offensive potential in some of the secondary directions on their main direction. I know we talked beforehand about secondary directions, but what is happening is they're not really having a big success on the northern side of Pokrovsk. Now, if you would look at Pokrovsk, where is the city? So Pokrovsk Mirnograd is basically this big city urban settlement. And if Russia wants to take it, they are obviously wanting to take it into a pincer attack. They want to encircle it from one side and want to encircle it from the other. The typical Russian playbook. And while they're advancing on this southwestern area of the city, they are not having such a good time on the eastern flank. And on the eastern flank, there has been countless reports that all of their potential assaults have been pretty much stalled. And on this map specifically, we can actually turn on fortifications, and you can see that this area where Russia are trying to attack into the eastern part of Pokrovsk Mirnograd agglomeration is very well fortified. There's still a lot of fortifications that Ukraine are having in this area, and they're building new ones, so they are not really having that great of success. Whereas they are having better success on this southwestern side, and most of it is because they were able to penetrate the Ukrainian defenses that were built in specifically this area, and the build-up in this part of Ukraine is relatively low dense. There's a lot of open fields. So there is very little defenses in specifically this area. So if we look back at the statement that I just made, that Russian tempo of advances stayed the same, potentially it didn't, because what could have happened actually is that while Russian advance tempo has fallen on generally Pokrovsk area, because they're now advancing in the area where there's a lot of fields, they are taking more nominal ground area, so to say, because it's open, there is no defenses. Whereas in practicality, they're still yet to advance to any kind of notable Ukrainian defensive lines. Overall, this is the pinnacle, the main point of the Russian attack. There is still a lot of Russian forces that are concentrated in this area, and Ukrainians are still trying to find the key to stop these Russian advances. We have recently heard that Mikhailo Drapati will be taking as a commander of the Eastern Command Forces, and my hope is that he will see to reorganize some of that Ukrainian defense, and we might see further slowdown of the Russian offensive. Now, a lot of people like to spread panic and say that, Pokrovsk is done for because Russia is moving around it. They still have plenty of challenges to go through. Firstly, there is still a road that leads to Pokrovsk, so there is still proper supplies coming in. Russia is not even close to cutting it. Secondly, for Russia to get to Pokrovsk, they still need to get through this. It's like a massive urbanized area with like a river here. So rivers have been pretty problematic for Russians. And then turning our eyes to a little bit southern side around Kurakhove. So Kurakhove was a big defensive positions for Ukrainians. This is where they held a lot of fortified positions. This is their stronghold. And a lot of the Russian analysts, if I can call them so, the Russian shills, they were telling that as soon as Kurakhove falls, Ukrainians are going to basically collapse in this sector. That Ukrainian defenses are so thoroughly built around Kurakhove that Russia will just be able to waltz through and just sweep this whole area clean. This is not happening. While Russia took control of Kurakhove, every advances that they're having in this area is slow, painful, and arguably marginal. And finally, let's talk about Vasilka Vasilka. And Vasilka Vasilka, the pocket that was there, has been finally closed by Russians. As I was telling you beforehand, Vasilka Vasilka is going to be dependent on what's happening in Novy Kamar. If you remember, Russians kind of stormed this Novy Kamar when Ukrainians still controlled Vasilka Vasilka and created this pocket. And if you can see, there is like these rivers that are coming over here. So Russians effectively cut off Ukrainians from a lot of their supplies. So I said, if Russians are able to control Veliki Kamar, we should just count down to when Vasilka Vasilka would need to be abandoned. And it's indeed what happened. So by now, Vasilka and Vasilka has been captured by Russians. And the only issue that Russians are having in this area is the same rivers. They're going to have significant troubles crossing these rivers, and potentially Ukrainians can abuse this if they will have the resources and if they have the capabilities. They could really turn Russian crossings of these rivers into a complete slog, and they can really slow down Russians in this area. If not, then most likely Russians will be able to advance, and we could see fightings for Alexandrograd or Mirne relatively fast. That's how the situation looks out right now. Now, I know we talked about Russia advancing everywhere, but I must repeat myself every time in stating that in big sense, in a large picture sense, whatever Russia is doing, it is completely inadequate to the losses they're having. We've talked extensively that the resources that Russia is having are running out, that 2025 is going to be a very painful, very slow year for Russia. So far, Russia is still riding on that high wave from 2024, but that wave is very obviously coming to an end. We already see they're slowing down, or even on their primary directions, they're having certain issues. I'm really hopeful to see how the change in Ukrainian command is going to affect this. But until we're waiting, I want to call on you guys to please continue supporting the Ukrainian armed forces, continue participating in our campaign. We're continue supplying Ukrainian armed forces with the vehicles. Whatever is the case, more videos to come. I love you. Slava Ukraini, and I will see you next time.
Бажаємо здоров'я! Ми бійці 93-ї окремої механізованої бригади «Холодний Яр». Звертаємось до команди «Бандеромобіль» Kharkiv Ukraine, команди з Ukrainian Metal, з проханням придбати автомобіль для виконання бойових завдань, підвозу боєприпасів та евакуації поранених. Разом ми сила. Віримо у перемогу та наближаємо її разом. Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
I say,